All right, we got two guests here for the rest of the program. We start things off with professional handicapper Kyle Hunter from HunterSportsPicks.com and BangTheBook.com. Kyle, how's it going today, man?
Going all right, man. A little bit of a challenging weekend here, but I have to say I'm pretty excited about the Sweet 16 matchups. I don't think there was quite as much drama here in the first few days of March Madness as normal. But what that means is there's going to be some really good Sweet 16 and Elite 8 games here coming up.
Yeah, that's the thing. Upsets are exciting, and upsets are great, and upsets are fun. But also, I feel like when you get to this point in time, and there are 16 teams left standing, I want as many of the top 16 as possible. And quite frankly, outside of Oregon, but Oregon's playing phenomenal basketball right now, we probably have, I would say, 15 of the top 18 or 20 teams left standing.
Yeah, I think we do. And, I'll be honest, Oregon's playing really good basketball right now. So, if you just take recent form, then, they wouldn't be far outside that if they were outside it. So, we've got some really good teams left in this field, and I think that's going to mean some excellent games. I mean, you look down this slate of Sweet 16 games, a lot of times I try to say, which game am I looking forward to the most as a fan? There's several of these games that I'm really excited about. I think there's some very good games here ahead. Yeah,
I think so too. And, again, one of the things that's really hard about being a Cinderella, and I do a AM radio spot here in the Cleveland area, and they kind of had a discussion about what makes a Cinderella. And I said, you at least have to make it to the Sweet 16 to be considered a Cinderella. But that's the hard part. In a one-off sample size, you may get a New Mexico State that nearly beat Auburn, or you may get a Liberty that beats Mississippi State, or UC Irvine knocking off Kansas State. That second game, putting it all together again, is the hardest part about being a Cinderella. And that's what we see here this time around. Murray State trucked by Florida State after really dominating Marquette. That's the thing, man. It's hard to put this together 2 straight games against the upper echelon teams.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great point to keep in mind for next year as well. If you look at those Cinderella teams after the first game, fading them in the second game has been a really good angle in the round of 32. And I think the round of 32 teams went 16-0 as far as favorites straight up. I know they went 11-5 ATS in the round of 32. The round of 32 has been the single best round for favorites in the NCAA tournament, and I think that makes a lot of sense. I think going forward, round of 32 playing favorites makes great sense, partially because favorites' prices are usually a bit depressed there. You take a team like UC Irvine, where everybody wanted to bet UC Irvine because they were the darling of, a 13 seed beat a 4 seed. Well, Oregon was playing really good basketball, and Oregon's a team that I had to reach the Sweet 16. I hope some people were able to cash on that one from the Bang the Book video on YouTube last week. That was plus 300, plus 325, and then I took Oregon a single game yesterday, so that was a good one for me. I had some bad plays there Thursday and Friday. Did a little bit better here this weekend, but it was I don't think Oregon should really be considered a Cinderella team. I mean, they're a 12 seed, but if you just took recent form, they wouldn't have been anything even close to a 12 seed. Peyton Pritchard playing really good basketball. I think his emergence as a star point guard has really made a big difference. And then Dana Altman. At this point, you have to say Dana Altman has really proven himself as a very good coach. Oregon lost their best player to injury this year. And then, the rest of the season, they play this well. Imagine what their upside would have been with bowl playing. So I think this is, one of those spots to where the Cinderella team is always in a really difficult spot in that next game. Like you just said, you Murray State, UC Irvine, Liberty, teams like that, can they sustain it for a second game? And the answer is usually no. You pick up that first NCAA tournament win if you're at UC Irvine or Liberty, and it's hard to cover that second game, let alone win straight up.
And again, Oregon's a team, we talked about them. You mentioned in the video, this is a team that's very, very talented, but just underachieved in the regular season. But they were a top 40, top 50 team over the course of the year. They just weren't getting the results. They had to pivot with Bull being out. Dana Altman doing a fantastic coaching job there with them, getting them to really commit on the defensive end, They slowed the pace down. They did what they had to do to be one of the better teams in that Pac-12, went on a run at the right time, and then, of course, now we see them making this run here into the Sweet 16. So let's talk in general about the Sweet 16 here. Let's talk about some trends for dogs, favorites, totals, and then we'll take a little bit more of a look here as we go region by region at some of the venues that we're dealing with.
Yeah, you get Sweet 16 overall. The dogs are 57, 50, and 5 ATS since 2005. Favorites have done really good in round of 32. Happened again this year, but dogs do have the edge in the Sweet 16. I wouldn't read too much into that. First half, favorites are 32 and 31 ATS in the last 63, so really nothing there. A stronger ATS angle has been a team with a 54% or lower ATS cover rate against a team with a 55% or higher ATS rate. So you're taking the team with the lower ATS cover rate, 36, 17, and 3 ATS since 2005. To me, that makes some sense. You've got a team that, the betting markets are probably not terribly high on because their cover rate's not as high as the other team. So you're trying to buy low on this team. And that one has worked well since 2005, 36, 17, and 3 ATS. And then the last one I'll say here, totals, 59, 51, and 2 to the under since 2005 in the Sweet 16. So the under has a bit of an edge, 28 and 18 to the under with a total of 141.5 or higher. So the higher totals have been pretty good underplays. And then the under is 21, 14, and 2 with a spread of 6 points or more. And this is something that I've tried to write about quite a bit in the daily article. I think that's something to really keep in mind in the NCAA tournament going forward, is that you really like to play unders more in games with a spread of 7, 8, 9, 10 points instead of one with a spread of 4 or 5. And why is that? Well, overtime's less likely, number one. Number two, a foul fest is less likely. So that's definitely something to keep in mind going forward.
Yeah, absolutely. And, as these games increase in importance as well, teams lock down more defensively. Usually you get lower possession types of games. So it does make sense that the under 28 and 18, a total of 141 or higher, because you get two offensive-minded teams, or at least two teams that are very efficient offensively. Well, everybody's going to buckle down a little bit more here defensively at this time of the year. So that definitely makes a lot of sense as well. And to your point about, teams with a lower cover rate against teams with a higher cover rate, keep in mind that even though the first 4 days of March Madness are over, and that's what the public really gets extremely excited about, the public is still going to be very invested in the Sweet 16 and the Elite Eight, whereas sharp bettors probably aren't going to be as invested because these lines are exceptionally tight at this time of the year. So the public still has a lot of influence in terms of line moves, and they're not going to back teams they feel like they can't trust.
Right. I mean, this is a time of the year where the public is going to be very heavily invested, and I think it's a good point to say the sharps likely won't have big money on these games. I got to tell you, when I look at these games and try to break these down as far as what kind of edge I have, these are very good lines, very, very tight lines. I know a lot of people really like handicappers in general to play quite a few games this time of the year. And some handicappers will oblige and say, hey, I'll just play every game on the board, or I'll play most of the games on the board because I know you want action. I don't like to do that. I like to try to play more when I think I have a bigger edge. This is a tough time of the year to find an edge, especially in the NCAA tournament games. So, we'll try to break these down, see if we can find a bit of an edge and talk about some of the numbers that would help. I do want everybody to keep in mind that these lines are very, very tight.
Yeah, they really are. They are extremely tight. And, one of the things I try to avoid with MLB season win totals, I try to avoid betting the really good teams and the really bad teams, because all I'm doing at that point in time is, betting on them to either be really great or really, really bad. There's not a whole lot of variance. There's not a whole lot of spread of outcomes for those teams that are really, really good. So when you talk about being down here to, 15 top 20 teams, I would say, maybe Virginia Tech, maybe just outside the top 20, something like that. When you talk about 15 top 20 teams, all of these teams are really, really good. And they're all here for a reason. And you're basically sort of betting either on variance or that one team will be just a little bit better than the other team. there's not as much equity in that as you would see like on a regular college basketball Saturday or something like that, where you've got a bunch of games to pick from, a bunch of high variance, inconsistent teams. These teams are still here largely because they play well every single time out.
Yeah, absolutely. The consistency is so important this time of the year. I think consistency and what kind of coaching you have is really important this time of the year. You know, they're going to have several days to get ready for these games in the Sweet 16. Then you have a really quick turnaround in the Elite Eight. I think the cream rises to the top here this time of the year as far as coaching. So that means quite a bit to me. You know, if you have a coaching advantage over the other side, I'm a lot quicker to try to push that small edge versus if I feel like you're at a coaching disadvantage, it's hard to take you there because, you know, it's very important this time of the year. So another thing I would say that's pretty important here is depth. You know, teams that have no bench or very little bench, especially in that second game of the 3 days, there can be some people get pretty tired. So that'll be something that we'll keep in mind as well.
All right, so we start in the South region here. These games on Thursday night, we're going to do South and then West to start it off, and then we'll do East and Midwest. After that, Purdue and Tennessee. This game of virtual coin flip had 2 questions in the Monday mailbag here today about Purdue futures, so we'll get to those in a second after we break this game in this region down. First of all, the Yum Center, Louisville, Kentucky. Obviously, tons of games played here. Very large sample size. Anything you're thinking about from a total standpoint for this venue?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything off about this venue. I think it's a very neutral site. There's been a lot of games there. You know, Louisville has had a little bit more unders than they have overs, but I don't think that has much of anything to do with the Yum Center. You know, I think Louisville has been better, especially in a lot of those years under Pitino, better on defense than they were on offense. And one of those teams that even though they played pretty quickly, you could see quite a few unders with them. I don't think it's because of the Yum Center. I consider this a neutral site.
All right, so Purdue and Tennessee here. This game, a virtual coin flip for the most part. Tennessee, 1-point favorite, pretty much market-wide. Pinnacle, the only one dealing a legitimate coin flip with a pick'em here. These are 2 coaches that we've talked about a lot here for the NCAA tournament. Neither Matt Painter nor Rick Barnes has had a ton of success in the NCAA tournament. So what do you think here about this matchup?
Well, I'll start by saying I had Villanova against Purdue. So one of the worst plays he could have had. You know, I always am honest about when I win and when I lose. And I thought Villanova had a good chance of beating Purdue, and I couldn't have been more wrong. I think that Purdue team that we saw in that game, they're not that good. You know, Purdue is not as good as they looked in that game. Carson Edwards has been dealing with a back injury, had really not shot the ball well at all. I apologize. And then all at once, here he comes in and just burying everything to start that game, and Nova was out of it in no time. To me, Purdue, a team that I think they're a good team. I don't think they're a great team. Harms is a good defender down low, not really a good second option scoring. Klein's a good three-point shooter. I think Purdue is a quality team. And you look to the other side, what do we think of Tennessee? I mean, what do you make of their win over Iowa? That was a really strange game. I mean, for the first half of the game, Tennessee was just absolutely blowing out Iowa. Iowa switches, starts playing some zone defense, switches the looks up a little bit, and Tennessee just struggles really, really badly. If you look over the course of the season, Tennessee has been very good against the zone defense. So I don't really know why Iowa's zone defense bothered them so much yesterday. Tennessee's in the 99th percentile of zone offenses, and yet yesterday they were really struggling with that zone defense. I don't know why. I think that Tennessee is a fairly inconsistent team for a 2 seed. And like we've said before, hey, Rick Barnes, he has to prove it before I can trust him. I don't love Matt Painter, especially in the NCAA tournament either. It looks to me like this line's going to move toward Purdue here. Pinnacle's one of the sharper books. I think that, if you like Purdue, you take the +1 now. I don't really think that that's going to be around. This is a game where I will not have a bet on this game. I think that this line's very close to what I would make it. The total, if I had to lean to anything here, I would probably take the under. I think the This is a massive game. This game means a ton to both teams. The defenses should be ready to go. I don't think either team is going to be pushing the tempo that much. When you get a total as high as this one is, and you have two teams who are, moderate pace or even slightly slower, I have to lean to the under in this one. I really have no strong lean at all on the side. Like I said, neither of these coaches are ones that I'd be rushing back. If you look at the matchup here, both teams very, very good on offense, very, very efficient on offense. Purdue, not a very good offense in transition, very good in the half court. Tennessee also better in the half court. So we don't really see any, glaring weaknesses from either team. But I do think that, if you just handicap the coaches, you'd be a little bit, who do I want to back here? And I don't think I really know the answer.
Yeah, I think that's a fair breakdown overall. I mean, you got a Purdue team coming off of 1.383 points per possession, 16 of 30 from three, both season highs for them in that game against Villanova. So certainly you want to play against outliers, and it looks like we have an outlier there with Purdue in that game. But, of course, 4 days off before this one to sort of figure things out, digest what Tennessee does, all that type of stuff. So I think it's a really, really tough spot. Now, let me ask you about the two futures that listeners asked me about. One with Purdue 125-1, one with a half unit on Purdue at 90-1. You have to hedge here, I think. This is a coin flip game. Purdue could obviously win it. You do have to keep in mind that if Purdue wins, they probably get Virginia where they're, 6.5, 7-point dog in that game. So you have to factor that into the equation. But you've got to hedge something here. So what do you think? I mean, how much would you be willing to cut into that future betting on Rick Barnes in this spot?
This is a hard question because, this is a coin flip game. Like you said, it makes it more complicated because of who they play in the next round. I'm looking to see what I think this line would be. I don't think Purdue would be quite that big of an underdog against Virginia. I think they'd be a 4.5 point dog, is what I would project in that one on a neutral. So that being the case, I'd be too heavy, especially did you say 90-1 is what one of them had?
Yeah, one is 125 and the other is 90.
Yeah, I mean, at 125, I think you have to hedge here. How heavily? I mean, obviously you have to try to handicap the game and see how much you like Purdue or Tennessee. Like I said, I think this line's going to move to where it's at least pick 'em, maybe even Purdue favored in this game. We'll see. But, if you have 125, I would hedge some. I would be cautious to hedge really heavily here because, what do you do if you hedge really heavily and Purdue wins? You're going to be in a tough spot the next game. So if you have 90-1, I'd make a small hedge. 125-1, somewhere in the moderate range if you think Tennessee has a good chance. But I will say, I think if I was forced to take a side in this game, I would probably take Purdue. So that being the case, I would hate to make a strong hedge and then be sitting there with Purdue against Virginia because, Virginia, even though they've had trouble in the tournament, Bennett's a really good coach. I think that he's probably still underrated because people are low on him based on what they've done in the tournament. I think Virginia matches up fairly well against Purdue. I would probably like Virginia in that game, even just ATS-wise. So, I wouldn't hedge it too heavily would be the answer to that question.
I was way off on the Purdue Virginia line, so I apologize for that from the Monday Mailbag segment here. So I mean that kind of factors into the equation too. It's kind of a depressed money line from what I was looking at, 4.5. Somewhere in the minus 160, minus 175 range, something like that to hedge with Virginia. I mean, look, another option depending on your risk profile, and I've talked about this before, and this is something that I ran into and in fact kind of paid for a little bit last year in March Madness. So. That's my disclaimer, kind of take it with a grain of salt. But I wanted to get myself into a position where if I didn't have to hedge, I, wouldn't do it. I would wait until a live opportunity came up. But then there were some games where a team just got out so far ahead early on that I lost my chance to hedge. So this is one where this game is expected to be very close. You wouldn't think that, Tennessee does a wire-to-wire job and you can't hedge this thing out. So maybe you do take a couple unit pregame position see if you feel like you need to add more once the game actually gets underway. That could be an option here as well.
Yeah, I think there's a good chance this is a back-and-forth game. This projects as one to where, there's runs each way to where a team gets ahead by 6 or 7 points, but it's a very close game. So I think this one is one where a live hedge, at least for part of it, does make some sense. I think that, it'd be surprising to me if Purdue comes out and just runs Tennessee off the floor like they did against Villanova, and I don't think Tennessee will do the same thing to Purdue. So, I think this is a back-and-forth type game here.
All right, so the other game here in Louisville, Virginia and Oregon. You've got Virginia 8-point favorite at the books that have posted numbers. This one a little bit slow to go up here early on in the week, but you're not really seeing too much of anything. The total below 120 here. It's in the 118.5 range. What do you think about this 1 versus 12 game?
Well, like I said, the 12 seed here is a lot better than a 12 seed. I don't know what to make of this game because I can't lay 8 or 8.5 points with Virginia in a low total environment. I think it's a losing proposition in the long run to be laying 8 or 8.5 points with a total of 118.5. Virginia may cover this game, but as a long-term, betting idea, I just think that, the principle of laying that many points with that low of a total in the NCAA tournament cannot be, a winning strategy long-term. So I won't be laying the points here with Virginia. Will I be taking Oregon? I'm not sure that I will. I can't take the over. I know some people are going to bet the over and just say, well, 118, just blindly have to take the over. That's too low of a number. I'm not saying that I'll take the under. I mean, it's really hard to take under that number. But the way these two teams play, they could be 50-48. That wouldn't be surprising. I think this total is very low for a good reason. I will say that I think Oregon's season changed when Altman started switching to the zone and using the zone press a lot. Their zone press did a lot of damage against Wisconsin and UC Irvine. The big question about this game, and I really feel like this is the key handicap of this game, can they force turnovers against a Virginia team who ranks 14th turnovers per offensive possession in the country? I don't know that they can force Virginia to throw the ball away a lot. If they can, they've got a chance here. Virginia against the press so far this year has been pretty good, but that's been their biggest weakness on offense of anything. They rank 90th percentile in transition offense, 99th percentile in half-court offense, and 72nd percentile against the press. So, if you look at that, maybe Oregon plus the points has some value here. Oregon's press ranks in the top 10% as far as defensive efficiency. So they're very good at forcing turnovers out of that press. They don't foul very much when they're playing that zone defense. Maybe Virginia can get some offensive rebounds against that, but Virginia is not really a elite offensive rebounding team. This is a Virginia team that, is a good defensive rebounding team. They don't give up very many second chance points, but they don't really crash the offensive boards that much. I will say I was impressed that Virginia was able to win by 12 points against Oklahoma, and Kyle Guy goes 0 for 10 from 3. Kyle Guy is arguably, one of the top 3 or 4 shooters in the country. He goes 0 for 10, and they still win by 12 points in that game. So Virginia was doing something right in that game. It was their defense showed up, played very well. If I had to make a play here, I would probably lean toward taking Oregon plus the points. Like I said, in that low-scoring environment, I couldn't be laying the points here. Again, not one that I'm really anxious to bet.
All right, so you mentioned Purdue, probably a 4.5-point dog to Virginia in the Elite Eight. I presume Tennessee's in that same range?
I think Tennessee would be in that same range, yeah. Because you see the marketplace is fairly even on them. This is a Tennessee team that, still has plenty to prove, but they've played very well this year. So I think 4.5 is a good number there for either team, yeah.
All right, so then if Oregon pulls the upset here over Virginia, moves on, you have to think they get some significant respect at that point in time. How much of a dog are they to Purdue and Tennessee?
I think Oregon's probably a dog of And this is a hard one, because like you said, they got to be getting more respect, and they've been playing so well lately. Maybe 3.5-point dogs, something like that. So, I think power ratings, if you just went throughout the season, they'd be a bigger underdog than that. But, it'd be hard to make them a 4.5 or 5-point dog if they go and beat Virginia.
All right, so we move diagonally down to the bottom left where we go to the West region here in Anaheim, California, and that's the starting point here for these two games that we're going to discuss.
Yeah, Anaheim, you got the Honda Center, very good under venue. I would say this is probably the second best under venue in college basketball behind Madison Square Garden. Some people might say this one's even better. There's just been such a big sample size at Madison Square Garden that I would put it first. But the one thing I'll say is that, we talk about the Honda Center and how it's just, straight and an amazing underplace when, like, the Big West plays there, things like that. You do have bigger name teams playing here to where they're more accustomed to playing in a really big venue than is, UC Irvine and UC Riverside and teams like that. So I don't think the under angle is quite as strong here as it is when you're talking about the Big West Conference tournament. But this is definitely a very good under venue and not one where I'd be wanting to take the over.
Now, we talk a lot about context clues in the betting market and, sort of reading into things. And my initial thought here on Thursday with this Florida State Gonzaga line, the first game of the day on Thursday, which is interesting because it's the first game of the day all the way out in Anaheim. So it's a 4 o'clock local time tip-off. My first thought is, this line looks big. And my second thought is, it must be big for a reason.
Yeah, I think this is a really interesting line. I would have thought that Gonzaga would be a 6-point favorite here. They were 7-point favorites down to 6.5. Most places, still some 7s, quite a few 7s in Vegas. So this is a line where you want to try to shop around if you can. So far, if you look, there's been quite a bit of action on this already. This kind of points out what Adam said earlier is a lot of people are still betting these games. Maybe the sharps aren't going too heavy, but there's a lot of action on these games already for a Monday morning. 63% of the bets on Florida State, 70% of the money on Florida State. Will this line continue to go down? Probably a little bit. I think there'll be some buyback if this line does get down to Gonzaga -6 because Gonzaga's been so consistent throughout the course of the season. I will say, remember, Florida State beat Gonzaga, and Gonzaga remembers that from last year. So, Gonzaga has wanted this game. I don't think that Florida State's an easy matchup by any means, but, they wanted revenge. I think Gonzaga has easily the better starting 5 here. The point that I will make on Florida State's side, they're a much deeper team. Florida State's a really deep team. Their bench plays a lot of minutes. Gonzaga's bench minutes, they rank 314th in the country, according to Ken Palm. Florida State is 31st. So you got a Florida State.
We seem to have lost Kyle Hunter here for today's segment. We'll get him to call back in. The thing about this Gonzaga-Florida State game, I know it's a rematch of a game that we saw here recently, but also, this is the premier game, I think, of the Sweet 16 round. These are the types of games that you want to see. And from a Florida State talent standpoint, this game very well could be a Final Four caliber type of game because Florida State, as Kyle was mentioning there before he got cut off, such a deep team, such an athletic team, a team that presents a lot of problems for a lot of different programs that are out there. So this is a phenomenal game here in Anaheim, to say the least. And, yeah, it's kind of a shame that it comes in the Sweet 16, but, with so much going into this game with, Gonzaga having lost to Florida State before, with Florida State coming off of a really dominant performance, basically from tip to horn against Murray State. Florida State had some issues with Vermont in that first-round game, but in that second-round game against Murray, no problems whatsoever in that one. So Florida State, kind of a tale of two teams, and, it's kind of what we've come to expect from Leonard Hamilton here during the Leonard Hamilton days, where a team that's just loaded with talent, but consistency can be a bit of an issue. And we'll see if that winds up being the case here against Gonzaga. A Gonzaga team that, look, they had to be happy not to get Syracuse, just because Syracuse is such a tough team to go up against, such a tough team with that matchup zone. But you get Baylor, and a point that I'll touch, I'll ask Kyle about here once we get him back on the line is, I feel like for Gonzaga, playing against Baylor was better for them leading into this matchup against Florida State than playing against Syracuse. Because Baylor is a much better offensive team than Syracuse, certainly a much more athletic and I believe even a more talented team than Syracuse. So even though Syracuse plays that matchup zone so well and they play it pretty much better than anybody else out there, I think that getting Baylor, getting a team that gave them a little bit of a different look, a team that gave them a little bit more offensive pizzazz, I think that helps here when you go up against a team like a Florida State. So, once again, this game is so interesting for a variety of different reasons. And the other game in the West region, such a contrast with two phenomenal coaches, two defense-first teams there in Texas Tech and Michigan. Just such a different type of game there in that Texas Tech and Michigan game in the bottom of this region. And that's one of the things I love, about having so many good teams here in the Sweet 16 round is that we get a game like Gonzaga and Florida State. It looks like it should be a pretty offensive-minded game. Then you get that very contrasting style of game with Texas Tech and Michigan in that late game out there in Anaheim. So I really like that we've got two very different games here in Anaheim as we bring Kyle Hunter back on the line here. Kyle, you with us?
Yeah, I don't know what happened there. I was giving this long breakdown, and it might have been just talking to myself there for a couple minutes.
Well, the thing that I was talking about while we were waiting for you to call in here, and I kind of want to get your take on this. I feel like for Gonzaga, playing Baylor in the second round was more because the matchup zone is one thing, and you kind of grind it out and try to beat that. But Baylor's got a little bit more offensive pizzazz. So I think that kind of prepares you a little bit better for a game here against a team like Florida State.
Yeah, I think that what I was saying, and I don't know how much of it you heard actually, because I don't know when it got cut off, but I didn't really have any there's no way I could even know that I was cut off. It was kind of odd. But anyways, it was, to me that my strongest lean would be the under in this game. Florida State Gonzaga, you're playing in a venue where the under has done so well. The Gonzaga game before that ended up being high scoring was that way because there was a ref show in second half. Just tons of free throws back and forth, 92 points in that half. I would lean toward the under here. I think that Florida State's length on defense bothers almost everybody. Would it bother Gonzaga? I think it bothers Gonzaga at least some. Gonzaga's offense has been so great all year. On the side, like you said, I think this is a bit of a curious line. It looks like Florida State should be the play, but at the same time, do they want you to think that? I don't know. I don't really think that there's such a thing as a trap game, but to me, I don't see a lot of value here on the side. I think I like the under the best, especially at Honda Center.
All right, so the other game here, Texas Tech and Michigan, this is a much different type of game. You've got Chris Beard against John Beilein. You've got two very good defensive teams. You've got a Michigan team that's pretty damn good on offense as well, a Texas Tech team that can go through lulls at times, depending on how their go-to guys are performing. Real interesting one here with Michigan, a 2-point favorite, and that low total, which is already on the move down.
Yeah, I think this is a fantastic game. What a coaching matchup here. Chris Beard against Beilein. You can't really give either team a coaching edge. I think that you could make the case that Beilein's been the most consistent coach in the country here for the last few years, but Beard is doing a tremendous job at Texas Tech. If you look at Michigan's profile, Michigan is not very good at transition offense. They don't really try to run. Very, very good in the half court. Texas Tech, a tremendous defense in general. If they're weak at all, slightly weaker against transition offense. In the half court, they rank in the 100th percentile in the country. So you've got strength versus strength here. Michigan is really good in the half court. Texas Tech, really good at defending there in the half court. What about on the other side? Texas Tech's offense, not quite as good as Michigan's offense. And Michigan's defense, pretty close to as good as Texas Tech's defense if they're not as good. The Big Ten is a very good conference. So I think these are two pretty even defenses as far as, their overall strength. And again, Michigan's defense really, really good in the half court. If they have any minor weakness, Michigan, it's post-up defense. Not great when it comes to defending the post. But you look at Texas Tech, they almost never throw it into the post and just go with the post-up offense. As far as percentage of plays that have just been post-up plays, less than 3% so far this year. So pick-and-roll heavy team, spot-up shots, some cutting. Michigan's very good at defending things like that. So it makes sense to me that you'd play the under here. Now, it's hard to play under this low of a number, so I can't get too excited about it. I think my lean here would be Michigan and the under. Not strong leans on either one of those, though.
All right, so as we project out the Elite Eight matchups here, let's say the two favorites hold serve, Gonzaga and Michigan. And, Michigan, the winner of Michigan and Texas Tech, probably a similar line in either matchup against Gonzaga or Florida State. But let's say it's Gonzaga versus Michigan. What sort of number are you looking at here?
Probably Gonzaga -3.5. This is a Michigan team that if they win that game would have proven quite a bit. Does anybody really want to bet against Michigan that much? Gonzaga has been better throughout the course of the season, but they play in that weaker conference. I don't think Gonzaga can lay too many points against Michigan. The venue, how far away Michigan is from home, hurts them a bit, but I think Gonzaga -3.5.
So does that make it about 5.5 against Texas Tech, or maybe a little bit lower?
Yeah, I think, what we see in the market right now would suggest that it's probably, Gonzaga -5 and maybe 4.5 if Texas Tech is really impressive in a win over Michigan there.
All right, so what about Florida State against either one of those two teams? I mean, Florida State, a very interesting matchup against two defense-heavy teams because Florida State runs such a deep rotation, is so athletic. What about Florida State against the winner of that Texas Tech-Michigan game?
This is a tougher one for me. If Florida State wins that Gonzaga matchup, they're going to get quite a bit of love. I would think that, they've got to be an underdog. So I'll say maybe Texas Tech by 2.5. Michigan, Florida State, probably Florida State's going to be a dog of maybe 3.5 or 4 points in a game like that. I think Michigan is a tougher matchup for Florida State than is Texas Tech based on the way they play. Florida State's a team to me that has really, really high upside. I think they're a team that's just so athletic, but I don't think they have the consistency that a team like Michigan has. So, Michigan is so consistent on offense and defense. Florida State can go through those lulls. So to me, Florida State would be in a difficult matchup there if they play Michigan.
All right, so we're sort of running out of time here with this segment since I've got Brad Powers coming up at the top of the hour. So I guess we'll have to do another segment here this week. We'll decide if we want that to be Wednesday or Friday. Obviously, these games are on Friday, but we may be forced into that based on my schedule and availability here this week. But as we look ahead to Friday, Kyle, you've got LSU, Michigan State. Sparty's a 6-point favorite. Auburn, North Carolina. Tar Heels, a 4.5, 5-point favorite. Starting to see lines now for Virginia Tech, Duke in the 8 range. Houston and Kentucky -2.5. Obviously, Virginia Tech and Duke have already played, so we've got a little bit of a frame of reference there. What do you think initial thoughts here for the Friday games with the lines or some of the activity that we've seen so far?
Yeah, I'll just take a brief overview of these then. We've got, LSU, Michigan State -6. So far, we've got 53% of the bets on Michigan State, 65% of the money on LSU. I think that's people just trying to grab a number there. I don't think that's a really big position. Duke, -8. To me, my lean in that game would be Virginia Tech. I will say my concern about that lean is that, and I'm curious to get your input on this one as well, is what do you make of the fact that Duke just got that scare last game? If Duke hadn't gotten that scare, I would like Virginia Tech here a little bit more because you would have to think, Duke really should have lost that game yesterday. So Duke kind of has a new lease on life. They're a very high upside team. It's hard to imagine they'd overlook Virginia Tech. Having said that, I think Virginia Tech's a really good team with Justin Robinson back. I really think they're a dangerous team. So I couldn't lay 8 points here with Duke. Am I excited to take the points given the situation? Not really. I'll have to look at this game a little bit more in depth. It is Monday morning, but I would lean Virginia Tech in that game. Houston and Kentucky. Kentucky -2.5 or -3. I think P.J. Washington's the key here. We need to know about his status. I don't know what his status is. I would think that he's probably a bit doubtful here in this game, but it's a big game. Houston could definitely beat them even with P.J. Washington. So if he can go, they certainly want him to go here. But, we'll see about his status. That's certainly important. I would lean to the under in this game as an initial look here, Houston and Kentucky. I think that Houston's so good on defense. They can go through some lulls on offense. Kentucky's defense has been really excellent. Kentucky slows the tempo down. Houston in general is not a very fast-paced team either. So, my lean initially would be the under in that game. And then also the last one, just an initial look, Auburn and North Carolina. Look, the line here starts at North Carolina -5.5, goes down to 4.5 or 5 in most places. We've got some sharp action here on Auburn. The bigger sharp action here, though, is on the over. People really like this over. 60% of the bets, 75% of the money on the over. 160 this line starts at, and I've got 162.5, 163, even some 163.5 showing up. I can't blame people for taking the over there. I will say, you're taking over 163.5 in an NCAA tournament game. That's a pretty bold move. These games mean a lot. The question mark in that game for Auburn to me is, can they hold their own on the defensive glass? UNC is going to beat them on the boards. How bad? If UNC just crushes them on the boards, it's hard to see Auburn winning. They just have to make a ton of threes. So they've got to hold their own on the boards. Can they? I'm not sure about that one.
To your Duke question, I think that, maybe the Duke scare factor is going to be overblown just a little bit, because they were playing a team that, we talked about it last week, they wanted to see VCU. That's the team that they wanted, because they were going to torch that press in transition. UCF, with their length, with Taco Fall, with the way that team plays in the AAC, that was going to be a tough game for them, and it wound up being that way. Here against the Virginia Tech team that they already know, even with Justin Anderson back, they're certainly in a better spot. I'm kind of hoping this number comes down a little bit. Maybe I'd play back on Duke at that point, but that would be my take on that one. And we'll try to go a little bit more in-depth later in the week here as you get more of a chance to look at these Friday games. I know we didn't communicate if we were going to have a second segment or not before starting this one this week. So, we'll talk more about these Friday games at some point here throughout the week. Whether that's Wednesday or Friday remains to be seen. But Kyle Hunter of HunterSportsPicks.com, daily contributor to BangTheBook.com. What's going on over at your site right now, man?
Yeah, check out the March Madness All Access Pass. We still got some time left in the season here. There'll be plays both from the NIT, CBI, CIT, and also those NCAA tournament plays. So check that out over there at HunterSportsPicks.com. And also check out the free newsletter. I'll be sending out a free pick here for the Sweet 16 this week. So if you haven't signed up for that one already, I encourage you to do so.
And we'll be figuring it out with Kyle's videos this week on our Bang the Book YouTube page as well. And then also working on what looks like a second segment that we need to have. Kyle Hunter, HunterSportsPicks.com, BangTheBook.com, at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Appreciate the time as always, man. Thank you so much. And we'll chat with you again later in the week.
All right. Thanks, man. Take care.
There you go. There's Kyle Hunter, professional handicapper, over at HunterSportsPicks.com, the daily article at BangTheBook.com, on our Bang the Book YouTube page, and then also at Kyle Hunter Picks on Twitter. Prop swap. We've talked about it a lot here on the show. We've talked about going out there trying to find that futures and props value in the marketplace, whether it's college basketball, the NBA, the NHL, now Major League Baseball. Plenty of futures tickets posted for that as well. Sellers are going to be able to offer you odds that you cannot find at any sports book. They're looking to guarantee profit. They're looking to get a fair price for it. And as a buyer, you always want to be shopping around for the best prices. So head on over to PropSwap.com/BTB. Again, PropSwap.com/BTB. See what's for sale over there. See where you can find some value. See what you can buy over at PropSwap.com/BTB.